Hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video we'll be learning how to cut row and buba. So I have a little drawing here. So the measurement you will need is from your center back to where you want the sleeve to stop. So for instance, if you want the sleeve to stop at the ankle, then you measure from your center to the ankle, or from your center to the elbow. So the one I'm making is from the sleeve is going to stop at the elbow. So now let me use my measurements as an example. Let's assume my center back to my elbow is 20 inches. Okay, so I would keep that aside. Okay, from your center back to, you need to measure it from your center back to your elbow is 20 inches. I'll keep that aside. Now for buba, because it's buba and it's going to be free on your body, you need to add 1 inch to the quarter of the biggest measurement you're working with. So whatever your biggest measurement is, you add 1 inch to the quarter of your biggest measurement. So the biggest part of my body is my hip. So, and the quarter of my hip is 9.5. Then I'll add 1 inch for ease, which makes it 9.5, which makes it 10.5. Then plus 1 inch for seam allowance, that's 11.5. So now we already know what the bodice is going to look like. So 11.5, which means when I open it up, I'll have 23 inches when I open it up. Okay, so now the half of 23 inches is 11.5, which is the quarter of the measurements I'm working with. So now we already know what the bodice is going to look like. So now to know what the measurement you will need for your sleeve, you now need to take away the 10.5 inches. The 1 inch for seam allowance is not inclusive. Okay, so the 10.5, which is the quarter of my hip plus 1 inch for ease, is 10.5. Then you remove it from the measurement you have from the center back to your elbow, which is 20 inches. So if I remove 10.5 from 20 inches, I'll have 9.5. So that means the length of the sleeve I'll be using is going to be 9.5. So the 9.5, you need to add 1.5 for folding allowance around here, and also you add 1 inch to the top of the sleeve. That 1 inch is what you'll be joining. You use to join the sleeve to the bodies. Okay, and remember we add 1 inch for seam allowance on the body, so that's why you also need to add 1 inch for the seam allowance on this side on the top of your sleeve, because the seam you are going to take around here must also correspond with the seam you are going to take around the sleeve area here. It must match. So now, to know the wideness of your sleeve, you need to use your armhole measurement, and also to know the arm opening around the buba, you need to use your armhole measurement. So my armhole measurement is 9.5, is 7.5. So if I add 1 inch to it, I'll have 8.5. So that means the opening I'll have around here is 8.5. Okay, so that means the wideness of my sleeve on fold is going to be 8.5. So when I open it up, it's going to be 17 inches. Okay, the wideness of my sleeve is going to be 8.5. When I open it up, it will be 17 inches. So the 8.5, you also need to add 1 inch seam allowance, so that makes it 9.5 on fold. Okay, so that is that. So, and also at the hem of your blouse here, you also need to add seam allowance after you've determined the length, and make sure it is on fold. You are not going to do any shoulder slant around here. It has to be on fold, and the neck must be wide enough for you to be able to wear and remove it, but not too wide. From 4 inches to about 4.5 is okay, or 5 inches, but 4 inches to 4.5 is okay. So now from your hem line here, from the hem of the buba, after the seam allowance, then you go up by 4 inches for opening. The opening is just for you to be able to remove and wear the buba properly. So I hope you understand everything I've been able to mention here. So when you are taking your seam, if it is 1 inch you took as seam allowance here, then that means you're also taking 1 inch as seam allowance here, and the seam must align. If the seam does not align, then you won't have a neat finishing around the arm area, around the armhole area here. So it's supposed to lay flat, like not squeezing, okay? But when the seam aligns together, it will lay properly flat. I'll also show you the process. So let's get into the cutting table. So the standard measurement for a wrapper is 2 yards and quarter plus your side seam allowance, that is plus your folding allowance for folding the edge of the fabric. So now the length of the buba I'm working with is 26 inches. Then I'm going to add 1.5 for seam allowance, so I'll have 27.5. So I'll just mark 27.5. You can see the way I'm folding it. I'm not folding from this side because this side is not on fold, okay? So I'll folded it on the other way around. So I'll just mark out my 27.5, sorry. So guys, I'm done cutting the fabric. Can you see this place is on fold and this is into 4? So now this, I've marked out the 1.5 seam allowance. This is the 1.5 seam allowance, and the hip measurement I'm working with is 48 inches, and the quarter of 48 inches is 12 inches. So quarter of 48 inches is 12 inches, which is what I have right here, plus 1 inch for ease. I have 13 inches, plus 1 inch for the side seam allowance. I have 14 inches, which is what I have. So the 14 inches is what you will take all through because you are using the biggest part of your measurement. So the next thing to do now is, so you are going to take 1 inch seam allowance on this side and also 1 inch seam allowance on the other side. And for the armhole of the person I'm working with is 10 inches. Then you had 1 inch for ease, which is here. This is the 11 inches here. So which means I just want to show you how you are going to do it if you want to take it to your sewing machine. So you just take your 1 inch. Now from the seam allowance, you go up from your seam allowance, go up by 4 inches. So that 4 inches, that means when you are sewing from here, you are going to stop here. You won't sew it to this place. So you need to leave 4 inches opening here. So I'll just mark the 1 inch. And you see, which means you are only joining from here to here, and you leave 4 inches opening here, and also you fold this 1 inch folding allowance. So the next thing now is, so guys, I lost the video around there. So I used 4.5 for the neck width, and I used 4 inches for the neck depth. So you are cutting the same for. So remember the sleeve opening, I said it was 11 inches. The armhole opening, which is 11 inches plus 1 inch seam allowance, I have 12 inches here. Now the length of the sleeve is 9.5 plus 1 inch seam allowance at the upper part here where you're going to join to the bodies. You have 10.5 plus 1.5 for folding allowance here. You have 12 inches. So, and this is the 12 inches here. This is the 12 inches. So, and make sure you are going to be joining the sleeve separately by joining it with the 1 inch for the seam allowance, and the bodies as well, you join it separately with the 1 inch seam allowance before joining the sleeve to it. And make sure you also notch the center of the sleeve around here, and also the bodies, you're also going to notch the center of the shoulder, which is around the armhole side. You are going to notch there so that you'll be able to place the notch part of this place to the notch part of the bodies, and then you join it around. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So guys, this is what I was talking about when I said the seam around the sleeve must match with the side seam. So this place now, can you see this? So this stitch I took here is around the sleeve. When coming, the seam should match with the side seam I took for the buba. Okay, this right here now is the side seam for the buba. So this right here is the side seam for the buba. This is it. Can you see the side seam? And the seam I took here was the one I took for the sleeve. So when bringing it, to be able to know that you have done the right thing and the sleeve will fall properly, the seam you are taking around the arm hole area here should meet up with the side seam here. I hope we understand that. Open it up. Your sleeve should fall neatly like this. Can you see how it is? It shouldn't have any kind of, folding around the arm. Can you see how neatly it is? So it should fall neatly like this. Can you see what I have around the arm? That's when you know you are doing the right thing. Okay, so, and this is the opening around here. This is the opening. So this is the opening. Okay, and I've gone ahead to tape the neck with bias. So I'm going to finish up the neck with my hand needle. So if you are using, note, if you are using a lace fabric, because there are some lace fabric that tend to expand, to stretch. So if you are using a lace fabric that stretches, I will advise that when you are cutting the neck, you should use about 3.5 to width. And also after cutting the buba, the first thing you should do is to sew bias on the neck before you start doing anything, because if you leave the neck like that, by the time you are sewing every other place, the neck will be expanding. It's something that I've experienced before. So in order to avoid that, I would urge you that you should reduce the neck and then sew the neck first before sewing every other part. So guys,
You've been making these shirts always. Daniel, see, I present you a shirt. Yes. Mommy, is that a shirt? Mommy, is that a shirt? Mommy, is that a shirt? Is it?